All right, so if you start right in the beginning of the Bible, right in Genesis chapter 2, that's when God actually creates the Sabbath, right? So God creates the world in 6 days, right? Every day he creates something different. On the seventh day, he actually doesn't make anything physical anyways. He doesn't make anything, but he takes a day off. He takes the Sabbath. Sabbath literally just means rest, right? So he takes a rest for a whole day. And it's right there, right in the beginning of Genesis 2, and this is what it says. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had done, which God had created and made. So it's kind of a lot of repetition there. But three main things. So three things that God does. He rests, he blesses, and he sanctifies, right? This verse is kind of important because I know there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, but the Sabbath, that's like a Jewish thing, right? Christians keep Sunday, Jews keep the Sabbath. The problem with that idea is there's no Jews in the beginning, right? Adam and Eve weren't Jewish. They were humans. Judaism, Israel only begins with Abraham, which is literally like 1,000 years away kind of a thing. So when God created the Sabbath, he was just making it for humanity, right? It wasn't a Jewish thing. It was for everybody, right? Including even himself. He took the day off as well. So 2 weeks ago, we actually read the 10 Commandments, right? So I'm not going to do that again. We know the fourth commandment talks about it, but I'm just going to skip over that. And instead, we're going to go to the New Testament. And we're going to see when did the day change? That's the question, right? So if it got changed to Sunday, when did it happen? So obviously the first question is, did it happen in Jesus's time when he was still alive? So this is Luke chapter 4, talking about Jesus. He comes back to Nazareth and he goes to church. So this is what it says. Here comes Nancy. So Luke 4:16 says this. So he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, right? That's where Jesus lived. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. All right. So this verse is important because it tells us that while Jesus was alive, at least, so as long as Jesus lived here on earth, his custom was to go to church on Sabbath, right? On the seventh day. And we see this throughout his whole life. There's never a day where he goes, where he changes it or he tells someone or anything like that. So as long as at least Jesus was alive, for those, 33 and a half years, we know he kept the Sabbath, just like any Jew, because he was a Jew, right? That's what he did. So Jesus kept it as a good Jew does. In Matthew 5, we read this 2 weeks ago as well, where Jesus actually talks about the law. He says, do not think I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For surely I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or one tittle by no means will pass from the law till all is fulfilled. So Jesus' own words says that nothing was going to be taken away and nothing was going to be changed until at least the second coming, right? When the world and the heavens will be destroyed and made new, right? So that's what Jesus says. But maybe he changed his mind, right? We don't know. So up until at least his death, we know Jesus kept the Sabbath. No one disagrees with that. Everyone, I've never heard anyone disagree with that anyways. But then people say, well, it changed when he died, right? So when Jesus died, that's when that change happened. So let's find out. Let's actually go to his death and see what everyone around him was doing, all his followers, basically. All right. So in Luke 23, Jesus has died on the cross, and they're just about to take him down. All right. This is happening Friday, right? We know he dies on Friday, resurrects on Sunday. So this is Friday evening, Friday night is coming. And so all of this takes place, I guess, Friday afternoon, but Jesus is dead already. So verse 53, then he took it down, wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb that he was hewn out of the rock. where no one had ever laid before. So this is Jesus being put into, I think it's Nicodemus, if I'm not mistaken, into what was supposed to be his grave, right? But he gives it to Jesus. That day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew near. So that word preparation just means Friday. It's like Jewish lingo. Because they couldn't do any work on Saturday, Friday was known as the preparation day. They still use that to this day, because what it means is I got to get ready because tomorrow I can't do anything, right? So I got to get all my cooking done, all my cleaning done, all that stuff, right? So that's what it's called. So that's what they're saying. Jesus dies on the preparation day, and Sabbath was drawing near. Sabbath was coming close. Verse 55, and the woman who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. So they followed, Jesus's body right to the tomb. Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils. All right. So I'll give you a regular Jewish funeral in those days. If it had happened on like a Tuesday. So if Jesus had died on a Tuesday, Jesus' body would have been taken down. He would have been taken into the tomb, which is kind of just this open area, flat rock. They would have put him on the flat rock. And then before wrapping him, they would have anointed him, right? So if you remember the lady that anointed him with his hair, that's why Jesus says she's preparing me for the funeral, right? Because that's what they would do. With the perfumes and the spices, they would anoint his body, really so that it wouldn't smell when it started decomposing. But they would put it all on him, and then they would wrap him up again. And then the funeral would be done. So that's like the final ceremony. Then they would close the tomb, and that would be it. But here it says that they followed Jesus to the tomb, and then they went back home. They returned. They went back home, got the spices and oils ready, and then waited. And the reason they waited is the last sentence. And they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. All right. So Jesus's followers, the women, his disciples, and all of that, they still kept the Sabbath even at his death, which is important, because what that means is, at least before Jesus died, he hadn't changed anything yet, right? Like it wasn't the last thing, like, guys, listen, I'm going to die. And before I die, I'm switching Saturday to Sunday, kind of a thing, right? Obviously, that didn't happen because they still keep the Sabbath, right? So the women are, they actually have to stop the ceremony, which is part of that whole funeral process, but they stop so that they can keep the Sabbath, which is why Sunday morning, if you know the story, they go very early, right? They go back to the tomb because the idea was to finish the ceremony, right? Somehow they were going to move the rock. I don't know how. And then they were going to finish the ceremony and then close it up again. But obviously that doesn't happen because he's resurrected, right? But what that shows us is, so for all of his life, he kept the Sabbath. And during those 3 days of death, they kept the Sabbath. In fact, you can argue Jesus even kept it. He died on a Friday. He could have resurrected on Saturday, but he didn't, right? For some reason, he takes the day off. He rests, right? He takes the Sabbath, and then he resurrects on the Sunday. Now, it's at this point that you can argue, okay, maybe it's after his death that it was switched, right? And in fact, a lot of Protestants say that, we keep the Sunday because that's the day Jesus resurrected, right? And so we keep the Sunday as a memorial of the resurrection, all right? So for now, anyways, we've done Jesus's life. We've done his death, the 3 days of his death. So now we're going to see after his death. Let's see if that holds true. Let's see if there was that switch. Best way to do that is to look at his followers. So we're going to follow Paul around, right? So Paul, he actually only appears probably a few years after Jesus' death, right? When he converts to Christianity. But he was very much about grace, right? Paul is all about grace. He's all about Jesus, right? The new way of worshiping. Paul really creates the church. If you think about it, he created the system that we now have. So let's see how he kept, or which day he kept. All right. So Acts chapter 17, the book of Acts just follows Paul around. Verse 2 says this: Then Paul, as his custom was, went into them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and demonstrating that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I preach to you is the Christ. All right. So Paul, at least, and it's very similar to Jesus's words, or to how they explain it about Jesus, right? As was his custom, went to the synagogue. So Paul keeps the Sabbath. He's still keeping the Sabbath. However, you might argue, yeah, but that's because Paul first always goes to the Jews, right? Paul always goes to the Jews. And where do you find Jews? Well, you find them in the synagogue on Saturday, right? And so you could argue, well, he's only going to the synagogue on Saturday because he's trying to reach the Jews, you know? But when he goes to the Gentiles, he would use the real day, which would be Sunday. So let's see here. First, we'll go to Acts 18, all right? After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth. So Corinth is basically one of the hubs of Christianity, right? Or becomes one of the hubs of Christianity. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome. And he came to them. So because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. So this is just a setup. This is when he finds Aquila and Priscilla. What's interesting, this is a little side message here. The rest of the time that it talks about Aquila and Priscilla, it's actually backwards. It actually says Priscilla and Aquila. All right. That's actually really important, because the way they used to write in antiquity is the more important person was always put first. We kind of do the same thing today, right? So a lot of people, my wife always hates this, but it's like, it's Pastor Stephen and the pastor's wife. Like, she doesn't even get a name. You know, she's always just known as the pastor's wife, kind of a thing. But she's always second. You know, every time they talk about, you know, us as a couple, it's always the Pastor Stephen and his wife, right? In the Bible times, it was even more important than that. So having your name first meant that you were the one with the authority. You were the one in charge. And what's interesting about that is whenever Paul talks about Priscilla and Aquila, Priscilla always comes first, which means she was the head. So even though she was a woman, she was the head of the household. She was the one, she was like the religious leader of the house, kind of a thing, which is pretty modern for Paul to do. Yeah, so you'll just notice that this is has nothing to do with the Bible study. This is just, when you read it, you'll notice that it'll always say Priscilla, then Aquila. And what it means is that she was the leader. She was kind of the evangelist, and not the husband. All right, let's go back. So the idea was, you know, Paul was preaching to Jews. That's why he went to church on Saturday, or the synagogue on Saturday. But look at what it says in verse 4. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. So he was meeting up not just with the Jews on Sabbath, but also with the Greeks, the non-Jews, right? But maybe it's just convenient doing one Bible study instead of two, right? You could still argue that. So let's go to Acts chapter 13. This is probably the most telling out of all of the verses we've read so far. In Acts chapter 13, Paul does what he always does. Saturday comes around, he goes to the synagogue, he tries talking to the Jews about Jesus. In most cases, they reject him, right? The vast majority. And that's what happens here. He preaches to the Jews, they don't want anything to hear about it, but then something happens, all right? So let's read it. So verse 42. So when the Jews went out of the synagogue, the Gentiles begged that these words might be preached to them the next Sabbath. So here is the perfect opportunity for Paul, right? He's gone into a synagogue on Sabbath. He's preached to the Jews that were there. They reject him, the vast majority. So instead, the Greeks come, the non-Jews, and they're basically like, Paul, we really like what you said. We want to hear more. So come back next week, come back next Sabbath. This is a perfect time for Paul to say, well, listen, guys, this is actually good. Let's just meet tomorrow, because that's the actual day. That's the day we should be keeping. It's Sunday. So let the Jews keep their Saturday, and let me do the Bible study on Sunday, which is when we should be doing it, right? Because if he's talking to Greeks, it doesn't make a difference, right? He's not talking to the Jews anymore. He's talking specifically to the Greeks here. But that's not what he does, right? So they ask him to come next Sabbath, and let's see what happens. Now, when the congregation had broken up, many of the Jews and devout proselytes followed Paul and Barnabas, who, speaking to them, persuaded them to continue in the grace of God. On the next Sabbath, almost the whole city came together to hear the word of God. But when the Jews saw the multitude, they were filled with envy, and contradicting and blaspheming, they opposed the things spoken by Paul. So here it shows that even though it was the Greeks that were talking to Paul, he still went to church on Sabbath, right? He still went to church on Saturday, and actually causes a problem because of that, right? Paul knew the Jews were already rejecting him. He knew that this was going to cause problems. So if Paul was actually keeping Sunday, why would he go back on Saturday? It doesn't make any sense, right? It would have kind of like, killed two birds with one stone. The Jews can do whatever they want, and I won't have to deal with them. And I can actually take the Greeks and we can worship on the right day. But you don't see that. Paul ends up going back on Saturday, and just as we read, that's what he did. Every Sabbath, he would go to the synagogue. All right. So that's what the Bible teaches in terms of Jesus's life, Jesus's death, and after Jesus's life. All right. But aren't there any Sunday verses? Right? There must be. For millions and millions of people to worship on Sunday, there's got to be something in the Bible, right? Like it just doesn't make sense that so many people will be following a day that's not biblical. All right. So we're actually going to read all the verses that talk about Sunday, and that the church actually uses to prove Sunday. All right. So let's read them. This is the first one, 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And it says this: now concerning the collection for the saints, you should follow the directions I gave to the churches of Galatia. On the first day, so that's Sunday, right? On the first day of every week, each of you is to put aside and save whatever extra you earn, so that collections need not be taken when I come. All right. And so a lot of churches use this verse here, and they say, see, listen, on the first day of the week, on Sunday, they're collecting money. There's an obvious problem with that. The first one is, nowhere does it say that they're actually going to church. All right. It's not talking about worship. It's not talking about, getting together or anything like that. It's specifically talking about money. All right. In fact, it actually says, so that I don't need to make collections when I come. So what he's saying is, before I show up every Sunday, and notice that it says whatever extra you earn. So it's basically saying, when you sit down and you do your finances every week, take a little bit and put it off to the side. This is actually written as if they're doing it at home, by the way. In no way it's not that the churches are collecting this money. The individuals are setting aside money, right? So that when Paul comes, everyone brings it at once, and then Paul can take it. So the couple of problems here is, one, it has nothing to do with worship. Two, it actually has nothing to do with church. This is things that people are just doing at home, right? Like when, I don't know how many people do this, but every week, you do your finances, or every month or every year. It's like this would be like tax season kind of a thing. And when taxes come around, you put a little bit off to the side. So yes, it mentions Sunday, but it's actually not connected to worship or church or anything like that. This is a specific thing. Make sure you just leave a little bit off to the side, and it's specifically extra money. So this is like a little offering, right? So that when I go back to Jerusalem, I can help the people there. That's all this is. The second one is Acts chapter 20. All right. In Acts chapter 20, now there is preaching here. So this one's a little bit stronger. So let's read what it says. Acts 20. Now on the first day of the week, Sunday, right? when the disciples came together to break bread, so it shows people coming together. So that's a good sign, right? They're gathering together. So it's like a little group, right? A church. Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. All right. So this one does seem like, Sunday worship, right? That's kind of what it sounds like. People are coming together and Paul is preaching, right? He's speaking. But this also has a couple of problems with it. Let me see here. So let's talk about the breaking bread. So a lot of people will be like, listen, they're getting together, which means they're going to church. The problem with that is if you go back a few chapters to Acts chapter 2, this idea of breaking bread actually happened every day. It wasn't like a worship thing. It was just a daily coming together to celebrate or to spend time together, right? So let me read it. Acts chapter 2, verse 46. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. So this idea of breaking bread isn't a Sunday worship thing. It's something they did every day. Now it's connected to worship. They would get together, they would eat bread together, they would pray and, do a little devotional or worship or whatever it is. But it's not a Sunday specific thing. This is a daily thing. So they would do this on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, right? And that's what we're seeing here. And that's what it says on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, which is something that they would have done every day. The difference, of course, here is that this is a special day, not so much because it's Sunday, but because it's the day before Paul leaves, right? So, imagine you have a guest over and he's staying with you and it's the last day before he leaves. What do? You have a party, right? You have a little get together. You bring everyone over, you eat a meal, you celebrate, you say your goodbyes, and, and that's it. That's what's going on here, right? This isn't a Sunday worship service. This is, listen, Paul's leaving. So let's get together. Let's break bread. Let's have a meal together. Let's say our goodbyes. Let's have our last chat. And we can say goodbye. That's really what's going on here in verse 7. So that's one problem that, this really isn't about Sunday worship. The other problem is we read this from an American view of time. We have to read this in a Jewish way of time, which is how they would have seen this. All right. So let me read it again, and we can pick out a few issues here. Now, on the first day of the week, which is a Sunday, right? First day of the week is obviously a Sunday. The disciples came together to break bread. Then it says, right at the end, that Paul spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. So if we take this the American way, if we take this like the traditional modern way of time, and if we see this as a church service, most church services start around 10 or 11, right? That's kind of when most people do church. Some do it a little earlier or whatever. But let's say this was a church thing. That means that Paul would get there at 10 a.m. He would start preaching maybe 10:30, right? So unless you're telling me that Paul preached from 10:30 in the morning until midnight, something's wrong, right? That means he would have preached for like 14 hours, 13, 14 hours. I don't know when they would have broken bread, right? Unless he's like preaching and eating at the same time. So something is off there, right? The fact that it says that he continued preaching until midnight, that's a long time. Unless we look at it through Jewish time, all right? Let me jump to Genesis 1. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter, obviously. So I'm going to pick out verse 5, 8, 13, 18, 23, and 31. All right. The way time works in the Bible is different than the modern way. For us, the next day begins at midnight, right? So today is Tuesday. Wednesday begins midnight, right? Boom, it's Wednesday. Not to the Jews, all right? To the Jews, it's already Wednesday because the sun went down, all right? Because the day begins at sundown, right? Which is how the Bible explains it here. And the evening, the sundown, and the morning were the first day. So the day begins with the evening. The day begins with the sundown, all right? So if we go back now and we put Jewish time into this, this is what it would mean. It was Saturday, and they were together, but then the sun went down and it was the first day of the week. It was now Sunday. That probably would have been, because it's in the Middle East, they're around the equator. So, you know, they don't have those big time fluctuations like we do. So like, it's not like 4 o'clock sunset and then like 9 o'clock sun. Theirs is usually around 6, 7 o'clock, right? So that means that they would have actually gotten together around 6 or 7 p.m. All right, which is reasonable. You know, they get together at the end of the day, at the end of Saturday, actually. So they did Sabbath. When the Sabbath is done, okay, now we can celebrate, right? Now we can actually do a little party, do all this stuff, you know, say the goodbye to Paul. So the Saturday ends, they join up, they come together, Saturday night, they eat a meal and Paul starts preaching. Paul would probably start preaching around 8, maybe. That means that he only preaches about 4 hours. Still long for me, you know, for a lot of people. But that makes a lot more sense than like 13 hours worth of preaching, right? And the fact is, you know, the Bible was written by Jews, right? The Bible was written by Jews who, that's how they thought. To this day, in fact, the Jews believe, and Adventists too, right? That's why it's Friday nights, that's when we start our worship, right? Once the sun goes down, it's the first day of the week, all right? And that's why it says this. So they actually were together on Saturday, they did their worship. And then when the sun went down, they had a celebration for Paul. They ate, Paul preached until midnight, which isn't as, you know, ludicrous when you see it that way. He preached for 3-4 hours. They did the goodbyes, and Sunday morning, Paul leaves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I had many arguments with this with my mother because she would say that to me growing up, like, oh, it's Sabbath now. And I'm like, Mom, it's so outdated. Like, they didn't have time then. Like, we can't apply this to now. It's still Friday. Like,
yeah. No, and you know what? It is tough. In Israel, it's fine.
Right? For me to grasp and obviously for me to follow, because I was like, it's not applicable anymore because now we have the concept of time.
Yeah.
So like, why aren't we applying that to our time now?
Yeah.
But
you could, I guess. I mean, it does. So I'll give you an example of how this becomes complicated. So when I was done school, when I went to university, I went up north because I was in Alberta. So I went up north to Alberta to Grand Prairie. So it's right at like the northern edge of Alberta. All right. So I was there in the summer, luckily. And in the summer, the sun sets at about 11:30. And then the sun rises at about 3 in the morning. There's only about 4 or 5 hours of darkness. It never actually gets dark because you can always see the sun a little bit. You see that little glimmer. So what that means is, so Friday night, you know, you do whatever you want because sunset's like midnight almost, right? But what that means is that Saturday comes around and Saturday lasts until like midnight again, right? The problem, of course, is in the winter. In the winter, you only get about 4 hours of sun, right? And so it becomes very hard. Like, when does Saturday begin and when does it end, right? So that is a thing. You have to remember when the Sabbath hours were created, it was done in Israel, which doesn't have that swinging, right? It's basically 7 o'clock, 6, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to follow. And we're living in a time when, yeah, there wasn't electricity, right? You couldn't just flip on a light switch and just keep working. When it was nighttime, you went to bed, unless you had a party like this. But besides that, 7:30, everyone's asleep, kind of a thing,
Yeah,
right?
like it would make sense why for them the day is over.
Yeah.
It makes sense. So that's why I would always get butt heads with my mom.
Yeah.
I'm like, the day's not over for some of us.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you're saying. But that's what the Bible teaches, so that's what we follow, right? But yeah. But what this teaches, though, is, again, this verse really isn't talking about Sunday as like the Lord's Day or anything like that. This is just another thing of they're actually keeping the Saturday, and then Sunday comes around, he talks during the night and then leaves in the morning, right? So again, it doesn't work. The verse doesn't work to prove that it was changed, right? In fact, Paul leaves Sunday morning, when he should have been in church, if that's the way of thinking, right? So the first two verses, so whether you were looking at where is it? 1 Corinthians really doesn't talk about the change of the day from Saturday to Sunday. Acts 2 or Acts 20 definitely doesn't. And then this is the third one, Revelation 1, which is when John, I guess, the apostle, he's in jail, right? He's on the island of Patmos. And I'll just skip to verse 10. It says this: I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice as of a trumpet. So a lot of Catholics, mostly Catholics, they'll use this one. They'll see, like, look, see, he was in the Spirit, so he was like worshiping on the Lord's day, and the Lord's day is Sunday. The problem is it's kind of backwards thinking, because the Catholics only started calling Sunday the Lord's Day like 1,000 years later. So when the Bible uses the Lord's Day, it's not telling us what day it actually is. In no way does it actually say it's Sunday, even though if you ask someone today, what's the Lord's Day? Oh, it's Sunday. But they're saying that because now they see it as Sunday. In fact, John, being a Jew, right? That's his background. The Lord's Day would be Saturday, right? The problem, of course, with this verse is that it doesn't say. It just says the Lord's Day. It doesn't say whether that's a Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or whatever. And so, yes, it uses the word Lord's Day, which nowadays we apply that to Sunday. But there's no evidence, there's no verse in the entire Bible that ever calls Sunday the Lord's Day. It just doesn't exist. And so just using the context of the Bible, the Lord's Day here would have to be Saturday, which is the day that's used for the whole Bible, right? So really, these are the three verses, plus the one that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Don't let no one judge you based on your Sabbaths and so on. But we explained that 2 weeks ago. You have a question or a comment?
Yeah. So I know, if we break the commandments and we sin, there's always consequences, right? But what is the consequence of worshiping God in a different day?
Okay.
We're still worshiping God.
Yeah. I totally get it.
But it's just
for me, it's not that it's bad. In fact, in Brazil, for instance, not so much here, but in Brazil, the Adventist church, they do church on Saturday, but they always do a service on Sunday as well, because they know, especially for those that have become Adventists, it's hard to change, right? Your whole life, you've been doing Sunday. And so it's a hard thing to just grasp, right? There's nothing wrong with worshiping on Sunday. Nothing, absolutely. You should worship God every day. I know a lot of people say that. Our church is
so adamant that it has to be Sabbath.
Yeah, that's because it's more than the Sabbath, to be honest. It really comes down to who are you following when you're worshiping God. That's really what it comes down to, right? So then you have these two options. You have the one that the Bible teaches, which is Saturday. And hopefully that's clear enough that we've been showing here, right? But then you have Sunday, which is a day that was created, right? It's man-made. And I'm going to show you a few verses that'll actually show that. So it was created by people, and that became the standard. That became the normal thing. The problem with it, and it's not a problem of the Sunday again. So it's not so much the law itself. The problem is once you do it with one thing, it opens the door for everything, if that makes sense. So God said to do it this way, but you know what? I prefer doing it this way. It's more convenient for me to do it this way. You can apply that to everything. You know, okay, God says that I should only marry one person and not cheat. But you know what? This is more convenient for me.
Yeah.
And that's where the danger lies. It's, you know, you're taking away the authority from God and the Bible, and you're doing whatever's convenient to you. So again, I've gone to churches on Sundays, right? I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with Sunday. For me, though, God tells me, listen, I want you to worship me. And it's not just, and this is where the big difference happens. A lot of Sunday keepers, I won't say all of them, but a lot of them, for them, Sunday is just 2 hours. You know, you go to church, you do your thing, and then you go home and you wash your car, you cut the grass, you watch TV, you go to the movies, whatever you want, right? That's very different than those that keep the Sabbath, right? Because when you keep the Sabbath, because you're following God, you're not going to be like, well, I'll follow God here, but not here. No, if you're going to follow God, then you got to do the whole thing, which means it's a whole day thing. It's a 24 hours. You're not just doing your own thing. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do anything fun. That doesn't mean you can't, go with your family. You can't go to the park or anything like that. But it should all be stuff where it doesn't distract you from, one, rest, actually getting that rest, and two, spending time with God, right? God should be kind of a part of it, right? So that's the bigger problem too is, and you've noticed this, when Saturday got switched to Sunday, it wasn't just the day that changed, but how they keep it changed, right? And it just ended up being, oh, you just show up to church, make the priest happy, give your money, and then you can do whatever you want, right? But the Sabbath is more than that. So even if you do believe, and this is why, I tell people this, most of my family is Catholic. Most of my family keeps Sunday. A lot of them are truly hardcore. They believe it, they do it, they put their lives into it, and they keep Sunday the way I keep Saturday. Like, it's important to them. They spend it with God. They do. I think God will respect that, right? They don't know what, they're doing what they've been taught, right? And I think God will judge them on that. I think he'll have a lot of mercy and he'll accept their worship and everything else. For me, though, my job is to tell you what the Bible says, right? And then you got to make a choice. And that's the harder part, right? Because, okay, this is what it says. Now you have to decide, do I do what God wants or do I do what's convenient?
Yeah.
Right? Do I do what I'm used to? Because I've talked to a lot of people who, and not just this Bible study, but any of them. And they'll say, listen, Pastor, I see it now. It's in the Bible there. I totally get it. I believe in it. But my family has always done it this way, and this is how I do it. And that's their choice. I don't like bash them over the head with it. I'm just like, okay, just realize what that choice means, right? You're purposefully going against God's will, right? Now, is God merciful? Absolutely. Is it the Sabbath that saves you? No. But it's the relationship, right? And the more you keep doing your own thing instead of what God wants, it's just that little crack in the relationship, right? And if it happens enough, it's dangerous. And so that's why I would say, you just have to be careful with it. Realize what you're actually, it's not just, oh, it's just one day or another. Not really. It's deeper than that, right? because it's what's behind all of that. It's what's behind your decision and all of that stuff like that. Let me get into the Sunday though. People always like this part. So in English, it makes perfect sense. It's literally in the name, Sunday, the day of the sun, right? I know in like Latin, so in Italy, it's the Domini, or I know Portuguese is Domingo, right? Which is the day of the Lord's Day, which is where they get the whole Sunday thing from, right? But realize that's a new terminology. Originally, it was Sunday, which actually comes from Old English, which literally means dies solis, or the sun's day. All right, but I think most people knew that. Constantine. So Constantine, you'll remember, he's the guy that became Catholic, or he's the guy that converted to Christianity. He was the emperor of Rome, marched his army through the water, baptized them all the stuff like that. But before he became Christian, in March 7th, 321, he made a decree called Dies Solis, or the day of the sun, Sunday, which became a Roman day of rest. So this is before Rome becomes Christian. All right. So pagan Rome kept Sunday. That was their day off. And this is actually his quote here. It's recorded in history. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates, the people residing in the cities rest, and let the workshops be closed. In the country, whoever persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue the pursuits, because it often happens that on another day it is not suitable for grain sowing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost. So everyone had to keep this day of the sun. Everyone had to worship the sun on Sunday, which is where it got its name, Sunday. Except if you were a farmer, because sometimes you don't have a choice, right? You had to grow or whatever on that day. So realize that Rome, before becoming Christian, starts keeping Sunday, but it's literally the worship of the sun. It was the sun god, right? So that's in 321. Not until 387 does Constantine become Christian, right? And he abandons the worship of the sun in favor of Christianity. The problem, of course, is he forced Christianity on everyone, right? He's the emperor. He has that power. From now on, everybody's Christian. But now he has, a couple million people who are used to keeping Sunday. That's their day of worship. And they don't want to change. And they kind of give the same arguments, right? Listen, what's the difference? We've been worshiping the sun on Sunday. Now we'll just call him Jesus. We'll just give the sun a new name. Or instead of S-U-N, now it's S-O-N. There, we fixed it, right? And that's what ends up happening. To avoid riots and all the stuff like that, Sunday, the worship of the sun, just becomes the worship of Jesus, right? That's really where Sunday comes from. And again, Rome being Rome has the power to spread that to the rest of the world. But it's nothing new. Mexico is a great example of this. The Catholicism goes to Mexico, and at first they try to destroy the Day of the Dead, right? Because it's pagan, it's all about worshiping the dead, all of this stuff. But when the church realizes that it's just too strong, like the people don't care, they're Catholics, but they're still doing it. Instead of fighting it, they said, okay, from now on, the Day of the Dead is Catholic. Now we're calling it Saints' Day, right? And that's what happened with the worship. It was Sunday, the worship of the sun. Now it's the worship of the Son of God, right? And then, just to really show the whole sun aspect, it wasn't just a Roman thing. So this is art from literally all over the world. So you got Egyptian, Indian, Chinese, and one thing that's common in all of them is the sun image. So if you see that circular disc behind the people, that represents the sun. That's the sun god lighting the person's life, or the god themselves being the sun god. What's interesting, when you look at early Christian art, you see the same imagery, right? So if you remember all the saints, they all have halos, right? Or they have those circles around their head. The word halo literally is Latin for sun. So it's literally the sun above them. The same worship that all the other religions that worship the sun, that imagery just gets transferred over into Christianity. So not only does the day transfer over, but the worship of the sun itself gets transferred over, right? And the imagery, the art, and that's why, again, all of early Christian art has that sun image there, the halo or the circular band around them. A lot of times, even I don't have a picture here, but I'm sure you recognize it. Have you ever seen like a cross with the rays coming out? That's the cross with the sun behind it, right? It's that sun, the sunbeam behind it. All of that comes from these ancient worship of the sun, right? It just gets transferred over and now it becomes Christian. So this is actually taken from a Catholic catechism. All right, it's an older one though. The new ones, they don't do this anymore because Adventists were using this too much. But I don't know if you know what a catechism is, but it's all about questions and answers, right? That's how it works. And so the question, which is the Sabbath day? The answer, Saturday is the Sabbath day. So it tells the truth. I actually really appreciate the Catholics because they don't lie about it. You know, like if you read the next part, it's just very honest. And I actually appreciate that. So it says this, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? If the Sabbath is Saturday, then, you know, why are we worshiping on Sunday? Good question. Answer, we observe Sunday instead of Saturday because the Council of Laodicea back in 336, which if you remember, right, that's roughly around the time when all that conversion stuff happens, transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. All right. So this is what the Catholic Church, the early mother church, is telling us. It wasn't because Jesus resurrected on Sunday. It wasn't because the Bible teaches it. It's because the council, the church, or at least they believe, has the power to change the day. It's not biblical. It's not whatever. This was a church decision. The church decided to move it from here to here. The Catechism of the Council of Trent, translated by John A. McHugh and Charles J. Kalin, stated, but the Church of God has thought it well to transfer the celebration and observance of the Sabbath to Sunday. Question, have you any other way of proving that the church has power to institute festivals or precepts? Answer, had she not such power, she could not have done that in which all modern religionists agree with her. And I'll explain that in a second. She could not have substituted the observance of Sunday to the first day of the week for the observance of Saturday, the seventh day, a change for which there is no scriptural authority. So the church itself is telling us there is no biblical scriptural authority that moves Saturday to Sunday. All right. What does it mean when it says all modern religions agree? This is something, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the Catholic Church very clearly says this. All of these Protestant churches, you know, the evangelicals, the Anglicans, the Baptists, all of these guys, they're all Catholic. They just don't know it because they're following our rules. You know, if they keep the Sunday, that's because of us, not because of the Bible. They make that very, very clear. And so I appreciate the fact that, you know, they just, and there's a few other ones, I could always show that afterwards, including this is actually from their like encyclopedia, if you looked it up. But they make it very just honest. They're like, listen, as a church, we had the authority to change it. And anybody that keeps that day is actually Catholic. They just don't know it, right? Because the authority that they're using for that day isn't from the Bible, it's from us, which means they're actually underneath our authority. Which is why they say, you know, everyone's Catholic. They're like the prodigal son, you know, they've just deviated, but one day they'll come back, kind of a thing. And any questions there? I know there was like a lot of verses and stuff like that. But again, and this is what I was saying before. I'm just here to tell you what the Bible says. At the end of the day, you guys have to make a decision. If you're comfortable staying the way you are, then, that's fine. If you think God's okay with that, that's up to you. That's between you and him. I personally always try to follow what the Bible says. I don't keep the Sabbath because I'm Adventist. Like, and that's why when I do these Bible studies, I'm not doing, these are the Adventist doctrine. Like, I don't care about that. I just read the Bible. Listen, this is what the Bible is saying. And then you either choose to follow it or you don't, right? But that's up to each person. Any questions at all? Hey, David, we're going to be starting the other Bible study in just a couple of minutes, but you can stay on. It's not going to log off. But any questions from anyone before we wrap up with a prayer? All right, awesome. Let me stop recording.